Welcome to Room 42. In this episode, we're talking about why technical comprehension improves when you add the A to STEAM. We've got Kylie Jacobsen, Assistant Professor of Writing at Grand Valley State University in Michigan. She's focused on user experience research methods in science, technology, engineering, arts and humanities, and math. That's STEAM. And particularly, she's looking at how you analyze the emotional journey of learning. Welcome, Kylie.
I'm Kylie here. Hello, good morning.
I've been looking forward to talking to you today.
Me too.
So first question I have for you is just because I want to know a little bit more about you. Now, what got you interested in the field of writing in the first place?
That is a great question because I've been thinking about that a lot too as I'm talking about where my students are coming in for this semester. And I think it really started for me back in high school when I never had any particular class that I truly struggled through other than chemistry. But when I had my journalism class, it was the first time that my teacher was like, you know, you really have a knack for this. You should really consider pursuing this. And I thought, that's it then. I'm good at it. I enjoy it. I'm going to go full forward with it. So I was looking for programs in Minnesota, where I'm originally from, that would have a program like that. And I stumbled across Southwest Minnesota State University. And at the time, I don't believe they had a journalism degree proper, but they had a professional writing degree. Okay. And so I went through that program and I was introduced to technical communication through there. And I was hooked ever since. Nice.
See the importance of teachers. They recognize and they promoted that in you, and look at it. And now you're here.
Yeah, it was really fun. I got to go back, a few years later, and I had seen my teacher around town. I said, hey, thank you so much, by the way. Yeah.
You were right. And what a great reward for a teacher, right? Yeah. To have such a positive thing come back to them. So now, in writing, is it both technical and professional communication that you're interested in, or is it mostly technical?
Yeah, that's a good question because all of my degrees are in professional writing, and except for the last one, which is in technical writing. But they kind of follow each other. It's more of an umbrella term, I would think, or professional writing is kind of the umbrella term for different types of writing that you do in a workplace situation. Okay. So I see technical writing as kind of underneath that term. I don't know that there are clear lines that would absolutely say that, yes, that is the distinction or not, but I have most of my background in professional writing with a good emphasis in technical writing.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. That was actually one of the questions from the audience. They want to know, how do they, what is the difference? Great.
That's going to be a new question I'm going to start asking everybody.
I think so too, yeah.
Because I think everyone has a little bit of a different definition, but we'll condense all of it into what everybody's saying is the difference between technical and professional.
So if there's anybody in the audience want to add their thing in the chat window, we'll add that at the end.
So let's talking about you research methods of research. So you're researching the researchers. And their methods.
You could say that in some roundabout ways, absolutely. This particular study that I have been working on for the last couple of years is certainly an exercise in looking at how we are looking at things.
Right. And another thing you touched on was the emotional journey of learning. I love that. So tell me more about what is the emotional journey of learning?
Well, as I was taking classes to learn how to teach technical communication, one of the classes that we had to take was a pedagogy class in the theories that underlie how we should be constructing our classes or what type of things we're going to encounter. And one of them that really stood out to me was user-centered learning. And I took a class in user-centered design and research, and I thought, wow, this really makes sense. And I wanted to take that with me into the classroom, but then also into some of the stuff that I was researching. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, what kind of things if you remember, what kind of things were stood out as the ones you wanted to take into the classroom and into your research?
Oh, participatory design specifically, like where you ask students to participate in whatever knowledge that they're building and then share and build on that with other students. So that's kind of where I started thinking about where students are in the classroom and where they make that turn between learning stuff or absorbing things and then switching that into actually using it or making meaning with what they have been talking about. And that kind of weaseled its way into this math research that I've been doing, where people have been talking a lot about how students are learning math and maybe where some of the pitfalls are in their experiences there, but nobody had really been tracking how students felt as they were going through the class. I think it's safe to say that we know math anxiety exists outside of a math classroom, but certainly inside.
Say the word math and I get anxious.
It's very stressful.
Math can be.
Mm-hmm. I think we were talking before, like if you're put on the spot to calculate the 20% tip and you're like, oh,
right.
Hold on, I can do this.
I got to get a calculator. Where's the calculator? Where's that tip chart? I used to have one of those like tip cards, so I don't have to think.
Pull it out. Yeah, but the thing is, like, that's easy math, right? Like that's things that we would do regularly, but when you're in the moment, that can be quite intimidating.
Yes, on the spot. Well, I'm like a deer in the headlights anytime you catch me on the spot with things anyways. So now,
trying to spell words on the board when people are watching you do it.
Oh, no, I won't do it. I won't do it. When I have to drive the computer and people are watching me, I'm teaching like a class and they have to watch me, I still get nervous. Don't take me off my course.
Yeah, all of a sudden she doesn't know where the stuff are. Like it's a weird thing.
Yeah, like I know the stuff, but all of a sudden my mind goes blank and I'm in a panic. It's like stage fright. It's like stage fright. So now let's talk about this research. Now the results are coming out soon, right? It's coming out in 2020 ProCom proceedings, right? And that's the IEEE
conference?
Correct, yep.
Okay.
Yep. So I presented the results at the conference this last summer, but the actual publication is coming out, I think, in a few weeks here.
Nice. Okay, so let's talk about this. So this was research that was going on. Give me a little bit more of the backstory about this.
Yeah, this is about a 2 or 3 year long project by this point, so it has quite the origin story. But as I understand it, a few years ago, there was a little shindig between a couple of faculty members, and they were talking about where some of the struggles that they had in the classroom were, especially with math students who are entering this advanced math course on reading and writing proofs. And that is the defining point in a math student's major at the university I was at, where if they pass that class, they probably will go on to complete their math degree successfully. And if they fail this class, they will not get their degree unless they take it again and pass. So it is a pivotal point in
everything rides on this.
Yes.
Talk about pressure.
And the numbers, they said only like 16 majors would graduate a year out of the hundreds that would declare a math major. Because this particular math class is the difference between studying equations and formulas and then transferring mathematic logic and knowledge into some sort of a rigid grammar of logic. So if you miss that switch, you're not moving on.
Right.
Oh.
So
and it was only 16.
Yeah, very small number of people.
Yeah. Okay, so they were having this discussion about it.
Yeah, and actually Dr. Kristen Moore, I believe it was, who was at Texas Tech University at the time, said, we can identify where that happens. We have the methods and the tools to identify where students are missing that reading and writing ability because we teach reading and writing. So they said, okay, we got to put some things together.
Hey, we teach that.
Yeah,
Connect those dots.
Yeah, so they pulled together a grant and pulled in a couple of students who taught and studied in the classical languages. Some of us who were from the English department. I kind of came from a technical communication background. We had some creative writers. And then we had the math students and their professors. We got together and said, let's do an eye tracking study on students as they are reading and writing some proofs. Now, I didn't have to.
You pulled in people that were not the usual suspects, right? You pulled in people from different backgrounds, completely different backgrounds.
Yeah, you put a poet and a mathematician in the room.
A poet and a mathematician. And
very
like a bar joke.
Yeah, they both walk in, and then what?
Right.
Some math kids learn to write proofs. I don't know. That's the end of that joke. So tell us about how the study worked. Like, what is an eye tracking study?
We were using the iGuide eye tracker that Brian Stell developed. He is the chair of the English department at Texas Tech University. And what we would do is take in students who had successfully passed the course and did well, and then students who were just brand new to the course and had no proper formal instruction on it yet. They might have had it from other classes, or if they were computer science majors, they probably have seen it somewhere else beforehand. But for the most part, they were true novices to this classroom. And students who had done really well and were experts at this point wore an eye tracking headset and looked at a screen while I observed them reading and writing out the proofs for whatever was delivered. Now, I didn't write the proofs. The math people wrote those, so I got nothing for you there. But we compared the results and the eye tracking movements of the novices and the experts. And we identified some pretty cool patterns and some very interesting approaches that we used ultimately to help redesign a curriculum that would address where some of those weaknesses or struggles were occurring.
Can you share with us some of those interesting findings?
Yes, I have pictures of it. I don't know if you'll be able to see it really well. But we noticed when the novices were wearing their headsets, they would read very quickly. They would spend approximately 3 minutes per theorem on, or with each project, or excuse me, with each theorem. And what they ultimately ended up doing was reading in this very up and down kind of W-shaped movement.
Oh, yeah.
Just frantically searching for proof that whatever theorem was presented was true or false or whatever they needed to prove. So there was a very quick reading, there was not a lot of comprehension, and they would often overlook very, I don't want to say obvious because that's not the right word, but very telling signs of what would be true or wouldn't be true based on the logic in that assessment or that theorem. On the other hand, expert students would spend about the exact same amount of time on each one. They would get twice as many correct. And that was because they were reading a more or less of this Z-shaped pattern, where they would start on the top line of the theorem and work across it and then come back down to find the conclusion to it. And so they didn't go down and look through the multiple choice answers as much because they knew, using logic, the beginning and the end, they knew exactly what they had to look for in the list of answers.
Okay.
So the thinking was there, but they were doing a very much more mindful and centered approach to what they were going to find in the answers, in the multiple choice answers.
Makes complete sense, right? Because, and we've seen this in like the movement in TechCom, right? Make it obvious, use bullets, use things that people are scanned, because I guess that's what we do. When we're brand new and don't know something, we scan and we look for the thing that's important.
Right.
Oh, that is, I was just doing that yesterday. I feel like a complete fool. Like I was just somebody's email and it was, I was like, yeah, wow, that's crazy. So if the behavior is different and the way that somebody approaches something, so that can help us design content and change what we write and how, like maybe split things up a little so that we know that a novice reader, somebody who's new, needs to have information presented like this.
Absolutely. If you've heard of the see-say-do triangle, which it's kind of the main tenet of usability at Texas Tech University as it's taught to us, is that you want to have your participants, or in this case students, You want to see them do something, you want to hear them say that they're doing something, and then you want to actually observe what they actually are doing.
Right.
And so what we found was students that were experts and were getting the answers correct were going through and circling or underlining major terms or points of logic. And when we asked them, who has taught you to do that, or where in your learning did you identify that that was something you need to do, they just did it. They said they were never taught to do that.
They just naturally gravitated to it.
Yeah.
And because of their seasoning, because they're a little more experienced, then they're more honed in on what's important and how to eliminate the things that aren't important.
And could identify that.
Right.
Saying,
whereas the novice thinks everything's important and nothing's important at the same time.
Yes.
And is in a little bit more of a panic trying to find what do I need to do, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because they didn't touch the paper at all with their pencil or pen. Marks left.
Interesting.
Huh.
So, and you had experienced students who'd been through the class, and you had some that hadn't been through the class. Was there an age difference as well?
There was probably an age difference in that students who are just entering the class are likely just entering their junior year, and people who have completed it are likely entering their senior year. Because that's about where it falls.
Not too far apart.
Just not too far in the age demographic. Yeah.
Interesting question, though.
Just a little more weathered.
Yeah.
In their college courses.
Yeah.
Wow. So I wanted to ask, like, how does the eye track, or what does the eye track? And I'm not sure. I think maybe you answered that. You're looking in experienced people. You're looking at keywords and able to identify keywords. Did you figure out with the W pattern? Did you figure out what they were looking for, or they were just panicked and scanning?
They were panicked and scanning. So I thought if I had the original, I could show you, because I didn't write the quiz itself.
So is that kind of also the emotions of somebody who's new and novice? I mean, that ties to your whole thing about the emotions of learning and when we were talking earlier about how, when something's new or something is just like math is notorious for people. Whether you're new or not, math usually causes a lot of anxiety. But when you're new to something, there is a level of emotional anxiety because you're not as confident in yourself. So that plays into how you try to research and learn. So when someone's writing like online help, for example, a practitioner is writing online help and they're writing to an audience, how would they take that into consideration when they're lining that up for people?
I think it comes a lot down to how you're segmenting. What are the basic things that you need to get across before you can move on to more complex things? And
so how they line it up is important.
Yes, right? And considering where they are in their understanding of whatever it is they're trying to accomplish. Yeah. So I'll show you what this is that they were doing on their eye tracker test, and then talk a little bit about how we tracked where they made movements in their career emotionally. So this is a basic theorem that they were given. Here at the top, it was like, prove this, and then here are your options to select if they are true or not. So students that were novice were actively reading from the top, where they were just trying to identify even what is happening in this theorem, and then zooming down here to try to find an answer because they wanted to just prove it right away and come back and forth, because you can't just make this if a condition down here is opposite,
Right.
Obviously, I'm not a math person, so I don't know if that's the most clear way to explain it, but what's happening is that they are looking for answers before they have read the entire question.
Before they've got the question. Yeah.
I've totally done that.
Right. And people do that in conversations, right?
Yeah.
When you're trying to discuss a point with somebody, it's that already have the answer. Like I'm already coming up with an answer before you ask the question.
Yeah, that's actually a really good analogy to what they were doing.
Right.
There's that panic.
Right. Instead of being patient and listening to you, fully ask the question before I answer. People are notorious with this, and I have actually stopped mid-question because I've noticed somebody started answering me, and I shut up.
Ooh.
and I say, will you let me finish the question?
She's talking about me.
Cat's out of the bag on that one.
Talking about me.
Boom.
So, has this changed? There's got to be research into writing quizzes, right? And like this is all coming out of education, learning, and research anyway. Who wrote the quizzes, and did they look at that too, or have you got conclusions for this? Or where does this research go? Maybe is the question I'm trying to ask.
Right. Yeah.
So while we tracked their emotional progress as they worked through all of these different types of theorems for these questions, we used the Genova emotion wheel, which is a circle of emotions, and then you can rate the intensity of each emotion that you feel on the circle. And what we found is that students who were experts and were doing really well on these were marking emotions in what we would consider like a high control emotion, something that they feel like they have a lot of control over.
Okay.
Inside the positive quadrant of emotions that you could feel. So emotions like pride, amusement, joy, things that you can generally control, but that they also positively associated with their work. Whereas novice students who were in this craze or this panic as they're trying to find the right answer, marked feelings like, I can pull them up here, like love and admiration, which are positive feelings, but they're low control emotions. But they also swung towards the negative side of this wheel, where emotions like frustration, disgust, fear, things like that start to bubble up. And those kind of teeter between things that you can control and things that you can't control. And so we worked really hard over the next summer to develop a curriculum that would identify where students were not feeling in control. Or feeling negatively and making that switch. I did not write any of these. These were provided by the math department. I could not write these if I wanted to. But they said these are the standard questions that the whole department would use or feel comfortable using. So I didn't talk to them about how these questions are formed or necessarily if this is the best way to write those. I don't have enough knowledge about what that should look like in that field. But what we took...
the math department could take your results and apply it to how they write. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, they could use the different curriculum lessons that we came up with. So that's where everybody comes into play here. We had the classical arts people, the poets, the writers, the math. We all got together and over the summer took these results from this eye tracking study and came up with this series of curriculum changes or lessons that they could implement in their classrooms that would help students take control of their learning in different ways that they had been and use participatory knowledge or close reading techniques, collaborative learning techniques, and actually engage in the material. So to improve their overall experience in the class, but then also their scores. So hopefully an actual understanding of the field. I have a whole packet of those that could be shared.
Okay.
But ultimately the results of watching these students use this new curriculum for the last year is what is coming out, is being published this fall.
So everyone got together, designed the curriculum, implemented the new curriculum, and then put a fresh batch of students through it.
Yes.
Based on this UX testing experience.
Okay.
Yes.
Very cool.
And did the math department change the question at all, or they just implemented some other things around it?
I don't believe these questions have changed at all. They have just changed ways that they are presenting the information to students.
Okay. And then what happened?
Well, it's actually really, really cool because half of the professors who were in on this study decided to teach that new curriculum and went through that training with these new modules that we developed.
Wow.
And the other half stood with the original curriculum so that we could compare.
Nice. So you had a control group.
Mm-hmm. It worked out really well in that way. But yeah, ultimately we found that statistically we can prove that students are coming into the class with the same amount of knowledge, general knowledge, and we can prove that by the end of class, students do improve their knowledge. So we know this class works in the first place. Wow. Then we identified the students who are using the new curriculum versus the older curriculum or the original one.
Right.
And we found that students who started from a base of 0 at the beginning improved their scores significantly enough by the end of the semester for us to say that yes, there is a significant improvement in understanding with students who are using the new curriculum.
And this is statistical significance, not just
yes. No, Sorry, I assume statistical significance.
Well,
yeah, but it's a good question.
We've had that discussion.
Good question. Yeah. I assumed, and I shouldn't have assumed, but yes. Okay, good. Go on.
But
use that math.
Yeah.
There's that math. But stats are fun. The best statisticians. The teacher that I had taught it using ballroom dancing, but that's another story, right? Talk about creative. So go on.
Trying to sign up for that.
Or do we all sign up for that?
That's way cool, actually.
Anyway, but continue.
So
sorry.
go on.
Yeah, but on the other side of that, students who took the old curriculum, while their scores improved, there was not a statistical significance in their improvement. Now, comparatively between the old and the new, those end scores are not significant enough to say, but we do know that with more data, we could probably look at that a little bit closer and identify what's really happening there. So we do see an improvement, and then we also took track of their emotional scores, the way that they perceive the class, and did find that students in this new curriculum participating in these collaborative techniques, these close readings, scored the class higher in terms of if they would recommend it to other students. Expressed they enjoyed it more.
So that's significant.
Yeah, and that's lessons for anybody writing, training, or documentation or anything, trying to teach someone something, right?
Yeah, students enjoyed themselves. They did better.
So even if they didn't score significantly higher in the new group, they were significantly happier.
They believed they were.
Yes.
Right? They were significantly happier, which means a lot. In long term, in life, in long term, it means significant. I mean, that is significant because you don't have that negative connotation.
Yeah, there will be no resistance to being more deeply involved in math or whatever it is that they're trying to learn. That's a huge thing. Wow. Cool.
Huh.
So
now
it's a year's worth of data. We don't know exactly which of the modules that we implemented were the ones that really made a change in students. We can see that it's all 9 of them that we created. That needs more look.
So are you going to go into like a second phase of this, or
I would love to. I'm no longer at that university, so I don't have access to this exact course structure. So I would hope I could maybe do something like that similarly here after the pandemic has allowed us to conduct research again with.
Yeah. It's hard to do any I guess you'd have to do a specific research into the situation that we're all in right now. But it's hard to do like a traditional type of research. In that situation. Yeah.
Well, and you have the lessons from that, right?
Yes.
You can improve your teaching style too. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we worked hard to make sure that there was an online component to each of these modules that we created. And now we know that classrooms will likely never look the same, or at least not for many years. And so maybe that part could be explored a little bit more as people are implementing more online instruction rather than face-to-face instructions. That's another
right?
avenue.
That is, and that's a good avenue, very timely.
So, and what kind of things, for example, are the, so we've got a bunch of practitioners in the audience, and we have people who are writing. We write instructional material all the time. We write explanatory things all the time, steps and tasks and procedures, and people either want to learn what we're teaching, or they've been told they're going to learn what we're teaching, right? Somebody
do it, or they're doing it voluntarily.
One or the other, right? If what you're telling us reduces that resistance and helps them adopt and feel comfortable, what kinds of things do you remember or were notable that we can all implement and do?
One of the favorites that instructors reported anyway as working really well in the classroom, and this is classroom based right now, but I could imagine there are ways you could pull this out, is inspired by some close reading techniques that we use while teaching creative writing, where you, in a normal creative writing classroom, you would take home a poem or some sort of piece of literature, and you would be given a different prompt every day that would ask you to reread that piece of literature with a new frame or a new question or perspective to analyze it through. Okay. So you're effectively reading the same poem 5 times a week, but you're thinking about it in 5 different ways.
You're being primed differently.
Yeah.
Right. Through different lenses. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so we did that, but with theorems. And so students took one home every day and were asked to challenge something based on a different type of theory, or challenge this logic based on this other rule or something like that. And so it was the constant everyday checking in and reframing, so that by the end of the week, you could properly articulate what is and isn't logic. Because you've had to explore it from so many different angles.
Right. So looking at from all these different lenses, it's like you're taking that 3D view, right, of that theorem. So you're seeing it multidimensionally.
Yeah, and you're building that common sense logic. You're not just being told this is true, this is false.
Now you're learning how to identify that.
Yes. And what's fun about that, or what's participatory about that, is the small group breakouts and sharing that knowledge with another person, and then you're confirming that you have looked at it in a different way, I guess, by comparing with another person. And that's the stuff I think you can really pull through into a professional setting.
Yeah, the small group breakouts.
Yes.
Where you can have a voice and you can state your opinion. And you can pose an argument and you can discuss it.
Yeah.
And come up with a conclusion. Because oftentimes it's in the discussion that we learn so much more. Having a discussion, one person, 2 people, and I think that's the premise that we did with this whole room, was we want to talk with people and discuss with you, because you learn so much more. You see a different dimension. Yeah. And you see it from all these angles, right? And you can state something and all of a sudden things click.
Right. Technical writers are in a wonderful position to make that bridge between people who can compartmentalize building blocks of knowledge with people who are seeing big picture. They're experts and they've got the whole thing in their mind. And that bridge, that connection, are those technical communicators who can make those participatory learning practices happen between all different types of individuals.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, because really honest, they dissect the complex and make it approachable for people like me, who don't know anything.
He says that.
Assume I don't know anything.
Awesome. Wow. I mean, and we're all doing that at some level. I mean, we're not all doing training, although Janice and I, that's pretty much what we do all the time now. But anything when you're writing a presentation or you're trying to explain an idea, coming at it from multiple ways is one of those ways. And you need that discussion with somebody else to have, hey, here's this idea. I mean, I cannot tell you the number of times I get an idea about how things work by reading something completely different, right? I'll read ACM Communications computer magazine, like I'll read some study about that, and it'll connect to something way over here for teaching data or something. And I wouldn't get that idea if I didn't have some other perspective coming at me from some other way. It's really cool to have that confirmed.
And that's what happened, isn't it, with you guys when you brought in the arts and humanities?
Yeah.
You weren't just having a bunch of scientists try to develop curriculum. You brought in poets and people who were from language, like teaching, what was it, Spanish? You were Spanish.
Yeah,
half that team was language.
Mm-hmm.
So they see things from a very different perspective, right?
Yeah. They know that dialogue is important to learning another language, that immersion into that different field. And so they echoed some of that practice in talking about things like math. Mm-hmm. Or we might consider like expert knowledge in an unfamiliar area, not necessarily always math. Or
right.
We could generalize some of that, I think, a little bit.
Right. Well, and math is a language.
Yeah.
Yes,
right?
it has a grammar.
From the people who teach a language, I can see where that's just a language. It's like
it is
engineering, the specific type of engineering. There's a language in there. There's acronyms that they use. There's a way that they talk and communicate that is a language of their own. So translating language is important.
Yeah. I'd love to see this research with, in some ways it feels to me like the theorem thing works in particularly well because it's structured writing. That a theorem is very structured writing. It is a specific way of putting things together and using a lexicon that mathematicians all know.
Right.
So it's almost not surprising that it worked as well as it did. Like I used to say to people, if you can write structured things well, you can write structured things well. It's not any different if it's math or computer or program or, your thesis. You're writing that stuff together. You're following a structure. God, I'd love to see this research happen in a bunch of different disciplines and have, oh my God, an education revolution.
Bring back the arts. Bring back the arts. It's not all just science. You have to have that balance, right? It's about balance. Mm-hmm. And I like the fact that, when you bring in arts and humanities, I mean, the word humanities, you're putting in a human factor, right? And people are learning. Like when we're writing, we're actually writing for people who are reading. That's people, not machines, right? And we want them to comprehend something. So it's putting the people back in, and we actually respond well to things that are not necessarily always that methodical, linear. Like we respond in a three-dimensional way. And it's adding that back in, which is important, because I think a lot of times those humanities, they get forgotten. Art gets cast aside.
Yeah.
And that's a shame, because I think all of that adds to that richness, because you're speaking to people. Ultimately, you're trying to teach people.
Right. And people who are coming in scared or hurt by this before, or have some sort of anger, and shifting that.
Yeah.
You're going up against a lot, even just trying to teach that in the first place.
So if you had one thing, it seems like part of your research can help technical writers convey their reasoning to be included in UX teams, in design teams, and definitely in anybody dealing with anything, talking to the customer, right? So what is one way what's something you can give to our audience about how to convey that feel to other people, right? Because we're tech pubs left off, whatever. You're just the writers,
it's usually
right?
the afterthought.
But how do they take what you've learned and say, look, here's why it's important I'm included?
It's important that we are included because we are taught and we learn how to teach reading and writing. We need to be included in these conversations because we understand how to engage the segmented pieces that ultimately combine into a larger understanding. But we have people that are taking care of that. We need to be involved so we can ask the proper questions about where is the missing link between what is a tacit knowledge or what is an expert knowledge. We can do that by participatory design or engaged design. So you're not going to just come in and talk to somebody about what they should know. You're going to show them how they can learn that skill on their own. I highly, highly, highly recommend the book Collaborative Learning Techniques by Barkley, Cross, and Major. They are coming up with new editions of that, and they talk about how to transfer a lot of that stuff into remote settings. It's an excellent book that would give you inspiration about how you can engage other people and make a case for why that particular technique is good for learning that particular content.
Right. And I think, you know, from a commercial perspective of what you've done in the classroom, that classroom study, I would look at that, you know, from the outside. I would look at that and say, okay, you've got customers who are trying to learn your very complex product. And you want to make sure you've got two things. Comprehension is good so that they understand your product. You want to make sure that they're happy with your product. And you want to have them come back to your product. So even though this was kids learning math in college, all of this translates into customer satisfaction, retention, and increase in sales, right?
Yes.
You just need to understand that you just apply that because people are people. They're just less experienced in the professional world, but they're not going to change. They grow up and they're still people, right? Out here in the professional world, we're still people. That didn't change once we left academia.
Hello.
So that study definitely directly translates into improved customer satisfaction and a strong argument for getting outside of just engineering being important, right? The engineering is important.
Oh, yes.
You need to bring in that arts and humanity, that touch, so that somebody will buy and understand and properly use your equipment or your product or your service, right?
And it improves accessibility to people who didn't grow up with that, right? It will improve the diversity of the entire workforce because more people have it accessible to them with better teaching methods.
Yeah, that's a really good point, accessibility. Yeah. Especially as we go, you know, we're more and more global, right? So accessibility becomes even more and more important, which means that this becomes even more germane to a company's success, an overall company's success.
Yeah, and I think that argument has been around for a little while that humanities are important, but we really wanted to apply some of the stuff that we know and bring it into a scenario like that. So I have the modules. If anyone ever would like to see them, I'm happy to share them.
Oh, good. Okay. And we've got ways that they can reach out to you.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So that they can request those.
Absolutely. Awesome. Wow. That was a great conversation. Thank you, Kylie. That was so great.
Are we at it?
We are out of time.
Oh, man.
And a perfect way to end it. She's like, hey, here's what you said.
I have more questions.
Awesome. Thanks for doing it. You are such an exciting teacher to come and do stuff. And I can't wait to see what research is coming next. I love it.
Yes. It was such a pleasure to talk to you.
It was.
Such a pleasure.
All right. Hopefully, anybody, last minute questions? Here we go. It's been quiet audience. I think that we talked around a lot of stuff.
Well, thank you again. And we hope to have you back for phase 2 of your research when you finally convince them on what you want to research and carry this forward. I think it'd be really interesting.
I think so too.
And I'd like to know if the other half of those professors at the university, if they just said, okay, we'll adopt that new method, or if they just stuck in the mud with their old ways. That would be interesting.
Yeah, I do believe it is standard now.
Ah, okay.
They're great.
I'm up there more, but
that you lost your control group then.
Just got a brand new control group at a whole nother university.
There you go.
Right? There we go. Awesome. All right. Thanks, everybody. And we'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.